Langley, Virginia, August 1960. The cigarette's ember flared in the dark, a lone star in the haze of Richard Bissell's office. The CIA's deputy director for plans leaned forward, his shadow slicing across the desk. Across from him, Sheffield Edwards, head of the Office of Security, sat rigid, his face a mask of caution. The hum of Langley's air conditioning was the only sound, a mechanical pulse underscoring the weight of words yet unspoken. Outside, the Virginia night pressed against the windows, oblivious to the treason brewing within. "We need Castro gone," Bissell said, his voice low, each syllable deliberate. "Not a coup, not a war. Just gone." Edwards exhaled, smoke curling toward the ceiling. "You're talking assassination, Dick. That's a line we don't cross lightly." Bissell's eyes glinted, unyielding. "We crossed it the moment Havana turned red. Fidel's laughing at us. Nationalizing our companies, cozying up to Khrushchev. If we don't act, Cuba's a Soviet dagger at our throat." The room seemed to tighten, the walls complicit in their conspiracy. It was August 1960, and the world teetered on a razor's edge. 2 years earlier, Fidel Castro's bearded rebels had toppled Batista's regime, promising freedom but delivering chaos. American casinos and sugar plantations, once cash cows, were now Cuban state property. Castro's speeches, fiery and endless, rallied his people against Yankee imperialism, while Soviet advisors whispered in Havana's shadows. The U-2 spy plane incident had humiliated Eisenhower, Khrushchev's threats loomed, and John F. Kennedy's campaign was stoking fears of a missile gap. In Langley, the CIA's failures stung. Clumsy propaganda, botched sabotage. The Bay of Pigs invasion was months away, its plans already fraying under scrutiny. Bissell, the architect of that gamble, knew it might not be enough. "Castro's not just a man," Edwards said, stubbing out his cigarette. "He's a symbol. Kill him, and you risk a martyr." "Then we make it quiet," Bissell countered. "No bullets, no bombs. Something clean. Poison, maybe. Something that looks natural." Edwards leaned back, his fingers drumming the armrest. He was no stranger to dirty work. Wiretaps, black bag jobs. But this was different. Assassination was a specter, a taboo even among spies. Yet Bissell's logic was relentless. Castro's death could fracture Cuba's regime, halt its Soviet drift, and redeem the CIA's tarnished honor. The idea took root, a dark seed in the fluorescent glow of Langley's war room. "How do we do it?" Edwards asked, his voice betraying a flicker of curiosity. "Our people can't get close. Castro's got guards, spies, that damn DGI sniffing every corner." Bissell's lips curved, not a smile but a calculation. "We don't use our people. We use theirs. The ones who ran Havana before Fidel burned it down." Edwards's brow furrowed. "The mob." "Exactly. They've got the connections. Casinos, smuggling routes, men still loyal in Havana. They hate Castro as much as we do. He took their playground." The suggestion hung heavy, a pact with the devil. The Mafia. Men like Meyer Lansky, Santo Trafficante, had ruled Cuba's underworld under Batista, their casinos raking in millions. Castro's revolution had shuttered their empire, exiling them to Miami's neon-lit fringes. Their grudge was personal, their reach still potent. But to align the CIA with murderers and racketeers was to wade into a moral swamp. "It's a risk," Edwards said. "They're not exactly discreet." "Then we keep them at arm's length," Bissell replied. "We need a go-between, someone who knows their world but answers to us." Edwards nodded slowly, his mind sifting through names. "Mayhew. Robert Mayhew." Bissell's eyes narrowed. "The ex-FBI man? He's a contractor now, isn't he? Private investigator, but he's done jobs for us, clean, reliable. He's got ties to the Chicago outfit, knows how to talk to them without leaving fingerprints." Bissell leaned back, the ember of his cigarette fading. Robert Mayhew was a shadow player, a man who bridged the lawful and the lawless. He'd worked for Howard Hughes, greased palms, and buried secrets. If anyone could broker this unholy alliance, it was him. "Get him," Bissell said. "Tell him it's national security, but nothing on paper. We call it executive action. No one outside this room knows." Edwards rose, his silhouette stark against the window. "If this blows up, Dick, it's not just our careers. It's the agency." "Then we make sure it doesn't," Bissell said, his voice cold as steel. In a Georgetown apartment, Robert Mayhew poured a scotch, the ice clinking like a warning. The phone call from Edwards had come an hour ago, cryptic but urgent. A meeting at Langley, no questions. Mayhew was 42, lean and sharp-eyed, his FBI days a distant memory. He thrived in the gray, where power and profit blurred. The CIA's summons wasn't new. He'd run errands for them before, discreet fixes for messy problems. But Edwards's tone carried an edge, a hint of something bigger. He flipped open the dossier on his desk, a single page stamped, "Eyes Only." Johnny Roselli, Chicago Mafia, suave and dangerous, a man who'd run Havana's Tropicana before Castro's rebels torched the dream. Roselli was the key, Edwards had said, the first step to unlocking Cuba's underworld. Maheu studied the grainy photo, Roselli's slick hair, his predator's smile. A man who could open doors or cut throats. The scotch burned his throat as he considered the stakes. Cuba was a wound, bleeding American pride. Castro's defiance mocked Washington, his Soviet flirtations a growing threat. Maheu had seen the newsreels, Fidel in his olive fatigues, waving to adoring crowds, a man who seemed untouchable. To kill him was to rewrite history, but to fail was to court disaster. He glanced at the plane ticket to Miami, booked for dawn. The Fontainebleau Hotel awaited, its neon glow a beacon for deals struck in shadows. Maheu drained his glass, the dossier snapping shut. Whatever the CIA wanted, it was no ordinary job. He felt the pull of it, a current dragging him toward a line he might not uncross. Georgetown, Virginia, August 1960. Robert Maheu set the empty Scotch glass on his desk, the clink echoing in the pre-dawn quiet. The dossier on Johnny Roselli lay closed, its secrets branded in his mind. A Chicago mobster with a velvet tongue and a killer's instincts, Roselli was the CIA's bridge to Havana's lost underworld. Maheu's pulse quickened, not from fear but from the thrill of the game. He'd danced with danger before, fixing problems for Howard Hughes, slipping bribes to men who thrived in shadows. But this was different. This was a plot to kill a king, and kings didn't fall easily. He crossed to the window, Georgetown's streets dark and still below. The world beyond was anything but calm. Fidel Castro's shadow loomed larger with each passing month. Since storming Havana in January 1959, his revolution had upended Cuba, seizing American oil refineries, casinos, and plantations. The mob's glittering empire, Lansky's Riviera, Trafficant Sans Souci, had crumbled overnight, its bosses exiled to Miami's neon-lit exile. Castro's defiance wasn't just economic, it was existential. His olive fatigues and endless speeches, broadcast on grainy newsreels, mocked Washington's impotence. Worse, his flirtations with Moscow, Soviet advisors, arms shipments, threatened to plan a communist fortress 90 miles from Florida. The Cold War's chill had deepened. Sputnik's beep haunted American skies, the U-2's wreckage emboldened Khrushchev, and Kennedy's campaign warnings of a missile gap stoked public fear. Maheu turned from the window, his mind replaying Edwards's briefing. The CIA's hands were tied. Direct action risked war. Exile plots were riddled with leaks. The Bay of Pigs, a half-baked invasion plan brewing in Langley's war rooms, was faltering under its own weight. Too many egos, too few secrets. Bissell, the plan's architect, was hedging his bets, and assassination was his ace. Poison, Bissell had said, something traceless. Maheu recalled a fleeting mention of cigars laced with toxin, a technical services division whim dismissed as too risky. The idea lingered, though, a whisper of the lengths to which the agency would go. Castro wasn't just a man. He was a fortress, guarded by loyalists and Cuba's ruthless DGI, its intelligence service honed by KGB tutors. To breach that fortress, the CIA needed men who'd once owned Havana's nights. The phone rang, jarring the silence. Maheu snatched it up. "Yeah, it's Edwards." The voice was clipped, urgent. "You're clear for Miami. Roselli's expecting you at the Fontainebleau tomorrow night. Keep it vague, national security, private contract. Nothing about us." "Understood," Maheu said, his fingers tightening on the receiver. "What's Roselli like?" A pause, then Edwards's voice hardened. "Smooth as silk, sharp as a blade. He'll want something money favors. Give him just enough to bite. And if he talks, he won't. Not if he knows what's good for him. But watch your back, Bob. This isn't the Bureau." Maheu hung up, the warning settling like lead. The FBI had been clean, rule-bound. This was a darker game. He glanced at the plane ticket on his desk, its edges crisp against the lamplight. Miami, the Fontainebleau, a palace of glass and glamour, where deals were struck over martinis and blood. Roselli would be there, waiting, his smile a trap. Maheu knew the type, men who thrived on power, who saw opportunity in chaos. The mob hated Castro, their lost profits a wound that festered. $150,000 Edwards had promised, but Maheu suspected Roselli would demand more: leverage, immunity, a way back to Havana's glittering nights. He packed a suitcase, movements precise, a suit, a revolver, the dossier. The revolver was a precaution, less for Roselli than for the world he inhabited. Miami was a cauldron, teeming with Cuban exiles plotting revenge, CIA operatives running JM Wave's covert hub, and mobsters licking their wounds. The CIA's training camps, hidden in the Everglades, churned out snipers and saboteurs, their dreams of a free Cuba fraying under DGI infiltration. Maheu had heard whispers of those camps, of men like David Morales, a CIA hardcase shaping exiles into weapons. Assassination wasn't their only plan, but it was the sharpest. Dawn broke, gray light spilling across the apartment. Maheu donned his coat, the plane ticket a weight in his pocket. He thought of Castro, the bearded revolutionary who seemed to defy death itself. Newsreels showed him laughing, waving to crowds, his charisma a shield. To kill him was to tilt the world's axis, to redraw the map of the Cold War. But failure, exposure, betrayal, could burn them all. Maheu's role was simple: open the door, let the mobsters through. Yet he felt the pull of something larger, a current dragging him toward a line he might never uncross. At Washington National Airport, the terminal buzzed with early travelers. Maheu checked his watch, the boarding call crackling overhead. He adjusted his fedora, the dossier tucked inside his briefcase, its secrets heavier than the revolver. The Fontainebleau awaited, its neon a beacon in Miami's haze. Roselli would be there, a man who could deliver Havana or destroy them all. As Maheu stepped onto the tarmac, the plane's engines roaring, he felt the spark ignite, a plot born in shadows, its flames yet to be seen. Miami, Florida, September 1960. The Fontainebleau Hotel glowed like a jewel against Miami's twilight, its curved facade a cathedral of glass and neon. Inside, the lobby pulsed with life, tourists in pastel suits, women in cocktail dresses, the clink of martini glasses mingling with a jazz trio's hum. Robert Maheu adjusted his tie, his eyes scanning the crowd. The air was thick with perfume and ambition, but he felt the undercurrent, the city's hidden pulse. Exiles plotting in backrooms, spies whispering in booths, mobsters licking wounds from a lost Havana. Somewhere in this palace of glamour, Johnny Roselli waited, a predator in a silk suit. Maheu clutched his briefcase, the dossier on Roselli a silent weight. He'd landed in Miami hours ago, the humid air clinging to his skin like a second suit. The city was a powder keg, its streets alive with Cuban exiles, doctors, lawyers, soldiers, united by their hatred of Fidel Castro. At the CIA's JM Wave station, tucked in a nondescript Coral Gables building, operatives like David Morales trained these men for war, their sniper rifles and dreams of liberation a volatile mix. Maheu had passed a newsstand on the way, Castro's face glaring from a headline. Another speech, another Soviet deal. The man was a phantom, untouchable, his charisma a shield against Washington's wrath. To kill him, Maheu knew, was to court chaos, but the CIA's orders were clear. Make contact, broker the deal, keep the agency's hands clean. He crossed the lobby to the Tropicana Lounge, its name a cruel echo of Havana's fallen nightclub. The maitre d' nodded, ushering him to a corner booth where a man sat alone, his profile sharp against the dim light. Johnny Roselli was 45, his hair slicked back, his smile a blade. He wore a tailored suit, sapphire cufflinks catching the glow of a candle. Maheu slid into the booth, his pulse steady but alert. Roselli's reputation preceded him. A Chicago enforcer turned Hollywood fixer, he'd run Havana's Tropicana with Meyer Lansky's blessing, raking in millions until Castro's rebels burned it all down. "Mr. Maheu," Roselli said, his voice smooth as bourbon. "You're a long way from Georgetown." Maheu met his gaze, unflinching. "Business brings me here, Mr. Roselli. The kind that needs discretion." Roselli's smile widened, but his eyes were cold, appraising. "Discretion's my specialty." "What's the job?" Maheu leaned forward, his voice low. "A problem in Havana. A man who's causing trouble for some powerful people. They'd like him removed." Roselli sipped his drink, ice clinking. "You're talking about Fidel, the bearded bastard who stole my city." Maheu didn't blink. "I'm talking about a contract. $150,000, paid through private channels. No questions, no traces." Roselli set down his glass, his fingers tracing the rim. "You don't look like a man who carries that kind of cash, Maheu. Who's bankrolling this?" "Hughes. One of your old FBI pals?" "Patriots," Maheu said, the lie practiced. Men who want Cuba free. You've got the connections. Men still loyal in Havana. Ways to get close. We need that. Roselli leaned back, his smile fading. He wasn't a fool. He knew a government job when he smelled one. The CIA's shadow hung over Maheu, unspoken but palpable. Roselli's mind churned. Castro's revolution had gutted his empire, exiled him to Miami's fringes. The casinos, the girls, the cash, all gone. 150,000 was a start, but leverage, favors, immunity could be worth more. Still, the job was a minefield. Castro's DGI was ruthless, his guards fanatical. One wrong move, and Roselli's head would roll. You're asking me to kill a king, Roselli said, his voice a murmur. Kings don't die easy, and I don't trust patriots to pay. Maheu's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even. You'll get what's promised, plus a chance to stick it to Fidel. He took your world, Johnny. This is your shot to take his. Roselli's eyes flickered, a spark of hunger. He hated Castro, that much was true. But he wasn't a lone wolf. I'll need partners, he said. Men with reach in Havana. It won't be cheap. Name them, Maheu said, sensing the hook set. Roselli glanced at the lounge's entrance, where two men approached, their presence shifting the room's gravity. The first was Sam Giancana, Chicago's Mafia boss, his swagger barely masking a volatile edge. His fedora tilted low, his grin a challenge. Beside him was Santo Trafficante, Tampa's Don, older and quieter, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Trafficant's Havana casinos had been his crown jewels, and Castro's betrayal cut deep. Maheu recognized them instantly, Sam Gold and Joe, the dossier's coded names. Gentlemen, Roselli said, gesturing to the booth. Meet our new friend. Giancana slid in, his cologne sharp. Heard you got a job, Maheu. Hope it's worth my time. Trafficante sat last, silent but watchful. Maheu felt the weight of their scrutiny. 3 predators sizing up prey. This was the alliance the CIA wanted. Men who'd bled for Havana, who'd kill to reclaim it. But as Giancana's grin widened, Maheu sensed trouble. These weren't soldiers, they were sharks, and sharks smelled blood. The air thick with calculation. Maheu's briefcase rested at his feet, a silent reminder of the CIA's gamble. These men, Chicago's kingpin, Tampa's quiet Don, Havana's exiled prince, were no patriots. They were wolves, and Maheu was offering them a hunt. Giancana broke the silence, his voice a rasp. 150 grand's nice, Maheu, but I don't risk my neck for pocket change. What's the real payoff? Maheu's eyes flicked to Roselli, who watched with a predator's calm. You get Havana back, Maheu said, his tone steady. Castro's gone, the casinos reopen, your empire's reborn. That's worth more than money. Trafficante stirred, his voice low measured. Havana's a graveyard now. Fidel's got spies everywhere, DGI, KGB. You think we can just walk in and poison his coffee? Maheu leaned forward, sensing the opening. You don't walk in. You use someone already there. Someone with access, debts, a reason to turn. Roselli's lips curved, a spark of interest. Juan Orta, he said, the name dropping like a stone. Used to run errands for us in Havana. Owes Lansky a fortune, gambling, girls. He's in Fidel's government now, low level, but close enough to slip something in a drink. Maheu's pulse quickened. Orta was the key, a weak link in Castro's fortress. Can he be trusted? He asked. Trafficant's eyes narrowed. Trust's a luxury. Orta's desperate. That's better. Giancana laughed, a harsh bark. Desperate's good, but I want guarantees. If this goes south, I'm not swinging for your patriots. Maheu's jaw tightened, but he nodded. You'll be protected. No names, no trails. But you deliver Orta, and you move fast. The deal hung in the air, a pact sealed in whispers. Roselli raised his glass, a mock toast. To freedom, he said, his smile sharp. Maheu didn't drink. He saw the cracks already. Giancana's recklessness, Trafficant's caution, Roselli's ambition. These men weren't soldiers. They were mercenaries, and mercenaries played their own games. Langley, Virginia, 2 days later. William Harvey slumped in his office chair, a tumbler of bourbon sweating on his desk. The CIA's newest recruit to Operation ZRRIFLE was a bear of a man, his ex-FBI grit at odds with Langley's polished halls. He'd run Berlin's tunnels, outsmarted the KGB, but this was madness. The file before him, stamped eyes only, detailed Maheu's Miami meeting. Roselli, Giancana, Trafficante, Orta. A murder plot dressed as patriotism, and Harvey was its shepherd. He lit a cigarette, the flame steady despite his scowl. Bissell's orders were clear. Kill Castro, use the mob, keep it clean. Poison pills, the The Technical Services Division promised botulinum toxin that'd stop a heart without a whisper. Harvey distrusted the gadgeteers, their talk of laced cigars and other nonsense, but pills were simple, deniable. The problem was the Mafia. Giancana was a loose cannon, bragging to anyone who'd listen. Trafficante was too careful, Roselli too slick. And Orta? A gambler with a death wish. Harvey scribbled a note, his handwriting sharp. No projects on paper except cover. Blame Soviets if exposed. He'd learned in Berlin, paper trails were traps. If this blew up, the CIA would burn, and Harvey wouldn't be the scapegoat. He'd run the operation from JM Wave, Miami's covert hub, where Morales was already training exile snipers for parallel plots. Castro's death was the goal, but Harvey saw the bigger war. A Soviet pawn 90 miles from Florida, mocking America's might. He drained his bourbon, the burn grounding him. The world outside Langley was unraveling. Castro's speeches filled Havana's airwaves, his Soviet deals inked in secret. The Bay of Pigs loomed, a gamble Harvey doubted would succeed. Exiles trained in the Everglades, their rifles gleaming, but Cuba's DGI infiltrated their ranks, turning dreamers into traitors. Kennedy's campaign, now in its final sprint, promised action, but Washington's resolve was shaky. Harvey's job was to cut through the noise, to make Castro a memory. Miami, the next day. Maheu stood on his hotel balcony, Miami's skyline a blaze of neon. The Fontainebleau meeting had sealed the deal, but unease gnawed at him. Giancana's bravado was a liability. He'd already boasted to a mistress, Maheu heard, drawing FBI eyes. Trafficant's silence was worse, a man who saw too much. Roselli was the linchpin, charming but dangerous, his loyalty to profit, not principle. Orta, the Cuban link, was a ghost, faceless, untested. Below, the city churned. JM Wave's operatives moved in shadows, their exile recruits plotting raids, assassinations, dreams of a free Cuba. Maheu knew the odds. Castro's guards were fanatical, his DGI relentless. The poison pills, when they came, would need precision, luck, a miracle. This was no game for idealists. He turned back to his room, the dossier open on the bed. Roselli's photo stared up, that smile a warning. The deal was struck, the machine in motion. Maheu lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like a question. Havana waited, and so did Fidel, a man who seemed to defy the grave. Miami, Florida, January 1961. The safe house smelled of stale coffee and cigarette ash. Its windows shuttered against Miami's relentless sun. William Harvey stood at the center of the room, his bulk filling the space like a storm cloud. Before him, Johnny Roselli lounged against a table, his silk suit pristine despite the humidity. A small metal case rested between them, its contents the heart of Operation ZRRIFLE. 6 botulinum toxin pills, each a glassy capsule glinting under the bare bulb. The Technical Services Division had promised death without a trace, dissolve one in Castro's coffee, and his heart would stop, a natural tragedy for Havana's savior. Harvey's voice was gravel, his eyes hard. These get to Orta. No mistakes, Johnny. He's your man, your responsibility. Roselli's smile was a blade, unfazed by Harvey's glare. Relax, Bill. Orta's hungry, debt's up to his neck. He'll do what we say. Harvey didn't trust the mobster's charm. Harvey had seen men like Orta in Berlin, weak links who crumbled under pressure. But Bissell's orders were iron. Get the pills to Havana, let the Mafia's man do the deed. Harvey's job was to keep the CIA's hands clean, a task he loathed sharing with criminals. He snapped the case shut, sliding it to Roselli. No records, no loose talk. If this leaks, we're all burned. Roselli tucked the case into his jacket, his movements casual. You worry too much. Orta's got access, restaurants, meetings. Fidel's a creature of habit. One slip and he's done. Harvey's jaw tightened. He doubted it. Castro's DGI, Cuba's intelligence service, was a spider's web, catching whispers before they grew. At JM Wave, just miles away, David Morales trained Cuban exiles for raids and sniper hits, their plans riddled with leaks. Harvey had heard of TSD's other schemes, cigars laced with poison, abandoned last year for lack of a courier. The pills were simpler, but simplicity didn't guarantee success. He turned away, the bourbon in his flask calling. Roselli's footsteps faded, the safe house door clicking shut. Havana, Cuba, a week later. Juan Orta sweated through his linen shirt, the Havana night heavy with salt and fear. He stood in a cramped apartment, its shutters drawn, the hum of a ceiling fan his only company. On the table lay the metal case, delivered by a courier who'd vanished into the city's alleys. Orta's fingers trembled as he opened it, the 6 pills gleaming like cursed gems. Roselli's instructions, slipped in a coded note, were clear. Slip 1 into Castro's drink at the Hotel Nacional, where Fidel dined unpredictably. $100,000 and a ticket to Miami waited if Orta succeeded. If he failed, Lansky's men, or worse, the DGI, would find him. Orta's stomach churned. He'd been a small man in Batista's Cuba, running bets for the mob, skimming profits under Lansky's nose. Castro's revolution had spared him, landing him a clerk's job in the new government, close enough to power to taste it. But debts followed, and Roselli's offer was a lifeline, or a noose. Fidel was no ordinary target. His guards, loyal to the death, shadowed his every move. The DGI, led by men like Fabian Escalante, sniffed out traitors with KGB precision. Orta had seen colleagues vanish, their names erased from Havana's sunlit streets. He paced, the fans hum mocking his panic. The Nacional was a gamble. Castro's visits were erratic, his table surrounded by aides who tasted his food, scanned his drinks. Orta's role, passing messages, arranging meetings, gave him access but not invisibility. One wrong glance, one tremor, and he'd be in a DGI cell, his screams unheard. He thought of Miami, its neon promise, then of Lansky's cold eyes. There was no way out but through. The radio crackled, Castro's voice filling the room. Another speech, defiant, railing against Yankee vultures. Orta flinched, the words a lash. Fidel's charisma was a tide, sweeping Cuba into his vision. To kill him was to defy a god, but gods bled, didn't they? Orta closed the case, his decision made. Tomorrow, he'd go to the Nacional, watch for his chance. The pills burned in his pocket, a secret heavier than fear. Miami, J.M. Wave Station, late January 1961. Harvey stood in J.M. Wave's command room, maps and photos pinned to the walls. Morales, his face carved from stone, briefed a team of Cuban exiles, their rifles ready for a raid that might never come. The Bay of Pigs loomed, its plans fraying under Kennedy's new administration. Harvey's focus was ZRRIFLE, the poison pills now in Orta's hands. He distrusted the Cuban, distrusted Roselli, distrusted the whole damned plot. Castro's survival mocked them, his Soviet deals tightening the noose. A report from Mafia sat on his desk. Giancana was talking, boasting to a Chicago singer about big plans in Havana. The FBI, unaware of the CIA's role, was circling, their taps picking up whispers. Harvey cursed, his bourbon flask empty. The Mafia was a cancer, but they were all he had. Orta was the key, a desperate man with everything to lose. If he failed, the pills would vanish, and Harvey would start again. Castro's laughter echoed in his mind, a challenge he'd silence, one way or another. Havana, Cuba, April 1961. The Hotel Nacional's dining room buzzed with clinking glasses and murmured Spanish, its chandeliers casting a golden haze. Juan Orta stood at the edge, a tray of drinks balanced in his trembling hands. His waiter's uniform itched, a disguise that felt like a death sentence. The metal case was gone, its 6 poison pills now hidden in a vial taped beneath his sleeve. Fidel Castro sat across the room, his bearded face alight with laughter, flanked by aides and guards whose eyes swept the crowd like hawks. Orta's heart pounded, each step toward the table a descent into madness. He'd waited weeks for this moment, Castro's rare visits to the Nacional unpredictable as a storm. The DGI's shadow loomed larger now, its agents sniffing out traitors after whispers of invasion reached Havana. Orta had heard the rumors, exiles massing in Guatemala, CIA planes circling. The city was a fortress, its streets patrolled, its loyalties tested. He edged closer, the vials weighed a curse. 1 pill in Fidel's coffee, Roselli had promised, and Orta would be free, debts paid, a new life in Miami. But the guards' stares burned, and Orta felt the DGI's web tightening. A radio crackled in the kitchen, news breaking through the chatter. American-backed exiles had landed at the Bay of Pigs, their invasion crumbling under Cuban fire. Orta froze, the tray nearly slipping. Castro's table erupted in cheers, Fidel's voice rising defiant. "The Yankees fail again," he roared, raising a glass. Orta's nerve shattered. The DGI would be everywhere now, hunting spies, traitors, men like him. He backed away, the vial untouched, his dreams of Miami dissolving in the din. Miami, J.M. Wave Station, April 18, 1961. William Harvey slammed his fist on the desk, maps and cables scattering. The Bay of Pigs was a catastrophe, 1,400 exiles dead or captured, Kennedy's administration reeling. J.M. Wave's command room was chaos, David Morales barking orders to salvage what remained. Harvey's focus was ZRRIFLE, the poison pill plot now in ruins. A coded message from Roselli had arrived hours ago. Orta had vanished, the pills returned to a Miami dead drop. The Cuban had cracked, spooked by the invasion's fallout and the DGI's iron grip. Harvey lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like his anger. He'd warned Bissell the Mafia was a mistake. Giancana's boasts, Roselli's slick promises, Orta's weakness. The invasion's failure had turned Havana into a bunker. Castro's security tripled, his charisma inflamed by victory. Harvey pictured Fidel's laughter, mocking their every move. Morales' sniper teams, trained for parallel plots, were no better, half their men betrayed by DGI informants. He grabbed the phone, dialing Mahu's hotel. "What the hell happened, Bob?" Harvey growled when Mahu answered. "Orta panicked," Mahu said, his voice taut. "The invasion lit a fire under the DGI. He thinks they're onto him. And your mob friends?" Giancana's running his mouth to half of Chicago. Mahu hesitated. "Sam's a problem. The FBI's sniffing around, but they don't know it's us. Roselli's keeping him in line for now." Harvey's grip tightened. Giancana's indiscretions were a ticking bomb, the FBI's taps catching fragments of the plot. Edwards was scrambling to deflect, claiming it was private business, but the lie wouldn't hold forever. Harvey cursed Bissell's obsession with the mob, cursed Orta's cowardice. Yet the mission burned in him. Castro's survival was a wound, a Soviet dagger at America's throat. The pills had failed, but ZRRIFLE wasn't dead. "Get Roselli," Harvey said. "Find another way. We're not done." Langley, Virginia, late April 1961. Richard Bissell stood before a window, the Potomac a gray ribbon below. The Bay of Pigs had cost him Kennedy's trust, the CIA's pride. In the briefing room, Sheffield, Edwards, and Harvey faced him, their silence heavy. The poison pill plot, their secret weapon, had collapsed with Orta's betrayal. Bissell's mind churned. Castro's defiance grew bolder, his Soviet deals tighter. The invasion's failure had rallied Cuba, Fidel's speeches a siren call to the Third World. Washington demanded results, and Bissell's career hung by a thread. "We keep going," Bissell said, his voice steel. "The mob's still our best shot. Roselli's got more contacts, more Cubans." Edwards frowned, his caution a counterpoint. "Giancana's a liability, Dick. The FBI's too close. If they tie this to us, it's over." "Then we tighten the leash," Bissell snapped. "Harvey, you're on Roselli. Find another Orta, someone who won't break." Harvey nodded, his bourbon flask untouched. He saw the flaws, Giancana's ego, the DGI's reach, but retreat wasn't in him. Castro was a cancer, and ZRRIFLE was the blade. The Mafia was flawed, but they knew Havana's underbelly. Another operative, another plan. He thought of Morales's exiles, their sniper rifles useless against Fidel's fortress. The pills were still their best chance, if they could find a man with guts. As the meeting ended, Harvey lingered, his cigarette's ember a lone spark. Castro's laughter echoed in his mind, a taunt he'd silence, no matter the cost. Miami, Florida, April 1962. William Harvey's boots thudded against the J.M. Wave safehouse floor, the air thick with humidity and tension. The room was a warren of maps, radios, and cigarette stubs, a nerve center for the CIA's war on Fidel Castro. Harvey, his suit rumpled, stood over a table where a new metal case gleamed. Another batch of botulinum toxin pills, courtesy of the Technical Services Division. Their promise was unchanged. One capsule in Castro's drink, and Havana's revolution would choke. But Harvey's faith in the plan was fraying, eroded by Juan Orta's betrayal and the Mafia's incompetence. Johnny Roselli sat across from him, his sapphire cufflinks catching the lamplight. "New pills, same game," Roselli said, his voice smooth but edged. "You sure about this, Bill? Havana's locked tight since the Bay of Pigs." Harvey's eyes burned, his bourbon flask untouched. "I'm sure Fidel's still breathing, Johnny. That's the problem. Your man Orta folded. Who's next?" Roselli leaned back, unfazed. "Got a new guy, a restaurant worker, close to Fidel's haunts. He's got debts, like Orta, but he's hungrier. Name's nobody's business until it works." Harvey's jaw clenched. He loathed Roselli's vagueness, the mobster's habit of dangling hope without proof. Operation ZRRIFLE was his burden now, thrust upon him by Richard Bissell's fall after the Bay of Pigs. The invasion's collapse had bloodied the CIA, leaving Kennedy's administration wary and Castro's regime stronger. Fidel's speeches, broadcast from Havana, taunted Washington, his Soviet ties deepening with every crate of AK-47s unloaded at Mariel. JM Wave buzzed with activity. David Morales training exile snipers, sabotage teams slipping into Cuba. But the DJI's web caught most before they struck. Harvey needed a win, and the pills were his sharpest blade. He slid the case to Roselli, his voice low. No more excuses. Get these to your man. No records, no leaks. If Giancana talks again, I'll bury you all. Roselli's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. Sam's under control. Focus on your end, Bill. Fidel's not the only one with spies. Harvey turned away, the warning stinging. Sam Giancana's boasts had nearly sunk them last year, his Chicago brags drawing FBI taps that Edwards was still deflecting. Santo Trafficante, the silent Tampa Don, was no better, his caution bordering on sabotage. Roselli was the linchpin, but even he was a gamble. Harvey's orders were clear. Keep ZRRIFLE alive, use the Mafia's Havana connections, and kill Castro before the Soviets turned Cuba into a fortress. But each step felt like a dance on a razor's edge. Langley, Virginia, May 1962. In a Langley briefing room, Harvey faced Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General's presence a storm cloud. RFK's crusade against organized crime clashed with ZRRIFLE's dirty secret. The CIA's pact with Giancana and Trafficante. Harvey stood rigid, his report clipped. The new pills were in play, a restaurant worker targeted, the Mafia's network activated. Kennedy's eyes, sharp and unrelenting, bored into him. This better work, Harvey, RFK said, his Boston accent cutting. Castro's a problem, but I don't like your bedfellows. Giancana's a thug, and the FBI's on him. Harvey's fists balled, hidden behind his back. We need their contacts, sir. No one else gets close to Fidel. Kennedy paced, his frustration palpable. The Cold War's stakes were brutal. Soviet advisors swarmed Havana, their missiles rumored to follow. Operation Mongoose, RFK's brainchild, demanded Castro's ouster. Sabotage propaganda, anything short of war. But assassination, unspoken yet understood, was the heart of it. Harvey's Mafia ties, though, were a poison pill of their own, risking exposure if Giancana's ego or the FBI's probes broke through. Keep it tight, Kennedy warned. No leaks, no mistakes. If this blows up, it's on you. Harvey nodded, his mind already elsewhere. He'd tighten the leash, but he wouldn't stop. Castro's survival was a personal affront, a Soviet taunt he'd crush. Back at JM Wave, he'd push Roselli, track the pills, and pray the new contact had spine where Orta had none. Miami, JM Wave Station, June 1962. The safe house hummed with static, radios relaying failed exile raids. Harvey pored over reports, his cigarette's ember a lone glow. The new Cuban contact, a faceless figure in Roselli's web, was proving elusive. Debts had bought his loyalty, but Havana's lockdown. Checkpoints, DJI sweeps. Slowed progress. The restaurant worker needed time, Roselli claimed, to get close to Castro's table. Harvey's patience was a fraying thread. He glanced at a TSD memo, its proposal absurd. An explosive seashell, rigged to kill Castro while snorkeling. Harvey snorted, tossing it aside. The gadgeteers were dreamers, their ideas as useless as the poisoned cigars they'd shelved. Morales' sniper teams were no better, their latest mission betrayed by a DJI mole. The pills remained ZRRIFLE's best shot, if Roselli's man could deliver. A knock broke his focus. Mahu entered, his face drawn. Trouble, Bill. Giancana's talking again, dropped hints to a Vegas contact. The FBI's circling closer. Harvey's curse was a growl. Get Roselli to shut him up, Bob. Or I will. Mahu nodded, but doubt flickered in his eyes. The Mafia was a hydra, its heads snapping at each other. Harvey lit another cigarette, the smoke curling like a vow. Castro would fall, DJI or not. He'd make it happen, even if it meant defying the world. The world teetered on the brink. U-2 photos had revealed Soviet missiles in Cuba, their warheads aimed at America's heart. President Kennedy's blockade was hours old, the Cuban Missile Crisis a global standoff. Robert F. Kennedy's orders were absolute. All covert operations against Cuba were to cease, Operation Mongoose frozen to avoid provoking Moscow. But Harvey's blood burned with defiance. He turned to David Morales, his chief operative, whose scarred hands clutched a report. Team's ready? Harvey asked, his voice a growl. Morales nodded, his eyes flint. 3 units, 10 men each. Rifles, explosives, some with your pills. They're set for Havana, but it's a suicide run, Bill. Harvey's jaw tightened. The poison pills, entrusted to Johnny Roselli's new Cuban contact, a restaurant worker whose name remained a shadow, had stalled, mired in Havana's lockdown. The DJI's grip was iron, Castro's security impenetrable since the Bay of Pigs. Roselli's updates were vague, his promises thin. Sam Giancana's boasts still drew FBI scrutiny, Santo Trafficante's silence a wall. Harvey had no faith in the Mafia, but he had less in Kennedy's pause. Castro's survival was a taunt, a Soviet victory by proxy. If the pills wouldn't work, his commando teams, exiles trained for sabotage and assassination, would. Send them, Harvey said, ignoring the static of RFK's orders. Fidel's head or nothing. Morales hesitated, then saluted, vanishing into the night. Harvey lit a cigarette, the ember a spark in the chaos. He'd heard of TSD's latest folly, an explosive seashell to kill Castro while snorkeling, a plan so absurd he'd laughed it off. Morales's sniper teams had fared no better, their last raid betrayed by a DJI mole. The pills were still ZRRIFLE's sharpest weapon, but time was bleeding out. Harvey's defiance was a gamble, one that could end his career, or the world. Washington, D.C., October 25, 1962. The White House Situation Room hummed with tension, maps and screens glowing under fluorescent lights. Robert F. Kennedy paced, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. The missile crisis had pushed the world to the edge, Khrushchev's defiance matched only by Castro's. RFK's focus was diplomacy, backchannels to Moscow, a deal to avert war. But a cable from JM Wave, intercepted by CIA Director John McCone, had shattered his calm. Harvey had sent commando teams to Cuba, some carrying poison pills, in direct violation of orders. RFK stormed into Langley, Harvey summoned to a briefing room that felt like a gallows. The Attorney General's voice was ice, each word a lash. You disobeyed a direct order, Harvey. You risked war with the Soviets. What the hell were you thinking? Harvey stood rigid, his bourbon breath faint. I was thinking of Fidel, sir. He's the root. We cut him out, the missiles don't matter. RFK's fist slammed the table. The missiles are all that matter. Kennedy's negotiating with Khrushchev, promising no invasion. Your teams could have lit the fuse. Harvey's eyes didn't waver. Fidel's laughing, sir. Every day he breathes, we lose. RFK leaned close, his voice a hiss. You're done, Harvey. ZRRIFLE's done. Get out. Harvey's fists balled, but he nodded, the weight of his gamble crushing. He'd sent 30 men into Cuba's jaws, their fates unknown, captured, dead, or lost. The pills, if they'd reached Havana, were as good as dust. Castro's survival mocked him, a wound that wouldn't close. Langley, Virginia, October 30th, 1962. Harvey sat alone in his office, the desk bare save for a half-empty bourbon bottle. His removal from ZRRIFLE was official, McCone's orders stripping him of command. The Cuban Missile Crisis was unraveling, Khrushchev agreeing to remove the missiles, Kennedy pledging no invasion of Cuba. Operation Mongoose, the CIA's war on Castro, was gutted, its sabotage and assassination dreams shelved for détente. Harvey's commando teams had vanished, their radios silent, the DJI likely feasting on their bones. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like a ghost. Roselli's last call had been curt. The restaurant worker was spooked, the pills undelivered, Havana a fortress. Giancana's indiscretion still haunted, the FBI's net tightening. Trafficante had faded into silence, his loyalty a question mark. Harvey's defiance had cost him everything. His post, his men, his shot at Castro. Yet Fidel lived, his laughter echoing in Havana's streets, a Soviet pawn untouched. Harvey crushed the cigarette, his mind racing. ZRRIFLE was dead, but the war wasn't. He'd find a way. New operatives, new plans. Castro's shadow loomed, a challenge he'd meet, even if it burned him to ash. The bourbon bottle gleamed, a silent promise. Havana waited, and so did he. Miami, Florida, January 1963. The JM Wave safe house was a ghost of its former self, its maps curling at the edges, its radios silent. Desmond Fitzgerald stood at the window, his patrician features taut against Miami's gray dawn. Operation ZRRIFLE, once William Harvey's crusade, was now his burden. A skeleton crew, a fading dream. The Cuban Missile Crisis had gutted Operation Mongoose, Kennedy's pledge to Khrushchev halting overt action against Cuba. Yet Fidel Castro remained, his defiance a thorn in Washington's side, his Soviet ties a quiet menace. Fitzgerald, the CIA's new covert chief, had one last card to play. A final poison pill plot, a desperate bid to end the bearded revolutionary. He turned to Robert Maheu, who stood by a table holding a familiar metal case. 6 new botulinum toxin pills, glinting like a curse. "This is it, Bob," Fitzgerald said, his voice clipped. "No more chances." "Who's our man?" Maheu's eyes were weary, the weight of 2 failed phases etched in his face. "Tony Verona," he said. "Exile leader, big name among the Cubans. He's got contacts in Havana, men still loyal from his days in Batista's government. He's ambitious, needs cash to keep his faction afloat." Fitzgerald's brow furrowed. Verona was a known quantity. Charismatic, connected, but hungry for power. The Bay of Pigs had fractured the exile community, and Verona's star was fading. $100,000 and a promise of influence could buy him, but trust was another matter. "Can he deliver?" Fitzgerald asked. Maheu hesitated. "He's got the reach, but Havana's a fortress. The DJI's everywhere. Roselli's handling the handover, says Verona's man in Cuba is solid. A bureaucrat with access to Fidel's circle." Fitzgerald nodded, his mind racing. Johnny Roselli was still the CIA's bridge to the Mafia, though Sam Giancana's indiscretions and Santo Trafficant's withdrawal had strained the alliance. The pills, crafted by the Technical Services Division, were ZRRIFLE's last hope. Simple, lethal, deniable. But Castro's survival mocked them, his security tightened since the missile crisis, his DJI honed by KGB mentors. Fitzgerald knew the odds. Verona could be their salvation or their ruin. He handed the case to Maheu, his voice low. "Get it to Roselli. No leaks, no mistakes. If Verona's playing us, we're done." Maheu took the case, his silence heavy. The safehouse door clicked shut behind him, leaving Fitzgerald alone with his doubts. Castro's laughter, broadcast on Havana's airwaves, echoed in his mind. A challenge he'd meet, or die trying. Havana, Cuba, February 1963. General Fabian Escalante leaned over a desk in DJI headquarters, his eyes scanning a decrypted cable. Havana's streets hummed outside, alive with revolutionary fervor, but Escalante's world was shadows. The Cuban intelligence chief, trained by the KGB, was a hunter, his prey the CIA's endless plots. The cable, intercepted from a Miami exile network, named Tony Verona and whispered of poison, a new attempt on Fidel's life. Escalante's lips curled, a rare smile. The Americans never learned. He summoned an agent, a young man with a face like stone. "Verona's contact in Havana," Escalante said, his voice calm but lethal. "Find him. He's ours now." The agent nodded, vanishing into the city. Escalante's network was a web, its threads woven through exile groups, CIA operatives, even the Mafia's fading Havana connections. The Bay of Pigs had taught him vigilance. The missile crisis had sharpened it. Fidel's survival was Cuba's shield, his charisma a weapon against Yankee vultures. Escalante knew the CIA's playbook. Pills, snipers, even bizarre schemes like a poisoned wetsuit, rumored to be in play with an American lawyer negotiating prisoner releases. The DJI had eyes everywhere, and Verona's man, a petty bureaucrat with debts, was already theirs, feeding lies to Miami while Havana watched. Escalante lit a cigar, the smoke curling like a vow. The Americans thought they hunted Fidel, but they were the prey. Verona's plot would crumble like Orta's before it, and Castro would stand taller, a god unbowed. Miami JM Wave Station, March 1963. Maheu stood in a JM Wave briefing room, Roselli across from him, the metal case now in the mobster's hands. The exile leader, Tony Verona, waited outside, his broad shoulders and slick smile masking a desperate edge. Maheu's stomach churned. Verona was a gambler, like Orta, but his ambition was fiercer, his need for relevance afire. Roselli's assurances. That Verona's Havana contact was reliable. Felt hollow, the mobster's charm a thin veil over doubt. "Verona's ready," Roselli said, pocketing the case. "His man's in place. Some clerk close to Fidel's dining spots. It's Orta all over again, but better." Maheu's eyes narrowed. "Orta burned us, Johnny. If Verona's man's another dud, we're finished." Roselli's smile was a knife. "Relax, Bob. Verona's got too much to lose. He wants his name in lights, not mud." Maheu didn't reply. The CIA's other plots were faltering. James Donovan, the lawyer, had unknowingly derailed the poisoned wetsuit scheme, delivering a clean suit to Castro. Morales' sniper teams, trained for parallel hits, were bleeding men to DJI traps. The pills were ZRRIFLE's last stand, but Havana's walls seemed higher than ever. Maheu thought of Escalante, the DJI's ghost, whose reach haunted every plan. As Roselli left to meet Verona, Maheu lit a cigarette, the smoke a fleeting shield. The game was slipping, and he felt the noose tightening. Paris, France, November 22, 1963. Desmond Fitzgerald sat in a discreet Parisian café, its windows fogged against the autumn chill. Across from him, Rolando Cuba, codenamed A.M. Lash, sipped espresso, his handsome face taut with doubt. A Cuban official disillusioned with Castro, Cuba was ZRRIFLE's last gamble, a desperate pivot from the faltering poison pill plot. Fitzgerald slid a small box across the table, its contents a technical services division marvel. A fountain pen with a hidden hypodermic needle, loaded with a lethal toxin. One jab, and Fidel would be gone, a quiet death in Havana's halls. "Use it," Fitzgerald said, his voice low, urgent. "You're close to him, Rolando. You can end this." Cuba's fingers hovered over the box, his eyes flickering with fear. "Fidel's guarded day and night. The DGI watches me. If I'm caught—" "You won't be," Fitzgerald cut in, though his confidence was a lie. Cuba's hesitation mirrored Tony Verona's, whose Havana contact, a bureaucrat promised riches, had gone silent weeks ago. Johnny Roselli's assurances had evaporated, the poison pills undelivered, lost in Cuba's labyrinth. Fitzgerald's other schemes were crumbling. James Donovan's refusal to deliver a poisoned wetsuit had killed that plan, and David Morales's sniper teams were bleeding out. But Cuba's nerve was a fragile thread. "I need weapons," Cuba said, his voice a whisper. "Rifles, grenades. Something to protect myself." Fitzgerald's jaw tightened. Arming Cuba risked exposure, but refusal could lose him. "We'll talk weapons later," he said. "Take the pen. Do it now." Cuba pocketed the box, his face unreadable. As he vanished into Paris's streets, Fitzgerald felt the weight of failure. Cuba was no assassin. Too cautious, too exposed. The DGI, led by Fabian Escalante, was a specter, its reach suffocating every plot. Fitzgerald's mind flashed to Verona, whose ambition had promised salvation but delivered silence. ZRRIFLE was dying, and he could feel the noose tightening. Havana, Cuba, late November 1963. General Fabian Escalante stood in a DGI interrogation room, its concrete walls stained with sweat and fear. Before him sat Verona's contact, the bureaucrat whose coded messages to Miami had been intercepted months ago. The man's face was ashen, his hands trembling as he confessed. The poison pills, delivered by Roselli's courier, were hidden in his apartment, never used. Escalante's agents had turned him long before, feeding lies to Verona while Havana tightened its grip. The pills were now in DGI hands, evidence of another Yankee failure. Escalante's voice was calm, a blade wrapped in silk. "You did well," he told the man. "Fidel lives. You live." The bureaucrat nodded, tears streaking his face. Escalante turned away, his mind on Cuba. The DGI had eyes on A.M. Lash, his Paris meeting with Fitzgerald reported by a double agent. The poison pen was a desperate move, and Cuba's fear made him useless. Possibly a plant, loyal to Fidel all along. Escalante's web had caught them all, Orta, Verona, now Cuba. Their arrogance no match for Cuba's resolve. Outside, Havana pulsed with life, Fidel's speeches rallying the faithful. Escalante lit a cigar, the smoke of victory. The Americans would try again, but Cuba was ready. Fidel was untouchable, a god forged in fire. Miami, J.M. Wave Station, November 23, 1963. Robert Maheu stood in the J.M. Wave briefing room, the air heavy with defeat. Fitzgerald's cable from Paris had arrived hours ago. Cuba had taken the pen but balked, demanding weapons, his resolve crumbling. Verona's contact was gone, likely arrested or dead, the pills lost to the DGI's jaws. Roselli's voice on the phone had been curt, his frustration palpable. "Havana's a black hole, Bob. We're done." The Mafia's Havana network, once a lifeline, was severed, Trafficante silent, Giancana distracted by FBI probes. Maheu lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like a requiem. The news from Dallas, breaking that morning, had shattered the world. President Kennedy was dead, shot in a motorcade. The CIA's Cuban operations, already faltering, ground to a halt, Lyndon Johnson's administration reeling. ZRRIFLE's third phase. Verona's pills, Cuba's pen, was a stillbirth, crushed by Escalante's counterintelligence and Castro's fortress. Maheu thought of the wet suit, the snipers, the endless failures. The DGI had outplayed them, turning assets into traps, mocking their every move. Fitzgerald entered, his face haggard. "It's over, Bob," he said, his voice hollow. "Verona's man was a DGI plant. Cuba is useless. Kennedy's death, it changes everything." Maheu nodded, the cigarette's ember fading. The pills, the pen, the dreams of Havana's fall, they were ghosts now, buried in Cuba's sunlit streets. Castro stood taller, his survival a taunt to the CIA's hubris. Maheu felt the weight of years, the lines crossed, the blood on his hands. The game was lost, and Havana remained Fidel's. Washington, D.C., November 23, 1963. The CIA's Langley headquarters was a tomb, its corridors hushed under the weight of a nation's grief. John F. Kennedy's assassination, a bullet through Dallas's heart, had frozen the world. Desmond Fitzgerald stood in a briefing room, his aristocratic calm shattered, his eyes hollow from sleepless hours. The poison pill plot, Operation ZRRIFLE's final gasp, lay in ruins. Tony Verona's Havana contact exposed as a DGI plant, Rolando Cubala's poison pen discarded in fear. Fitzgerald's gaze fell on Robert Maheu, whose cigarette burned untouched, its ash a silent elegy. "It's over," Fitzgerald said, his voice a rasp. "Kennedy's gone. Johnson's in. ZRRIFLE's dead." Maheu nodded, the words barely piercing his numbness. President Lyndon Johnson's orders, relayed through CIA Director John McCone, were blunt. Halt all Cuban operations, focus on stability. The missile crisis's détente, Kennedy's pledge to Khrushchev, had already clipped Mongoose's wings. Johnson, a pragmatist, saw no gain in chasing Castro's shadow. Economic sabotage and propaganda would replace assassination, a quieter war for a fractured world. Fitzgerald's hands clenched, the weight of failure crushing. Castro's survival was a taunt, his Soviet-backed regime a fortress 90 miles from Florida. "We pushed too far," Maheu said, his voice low. "The Mafia, Verona, Cuba. Every step was a trap." Fitzgerald's eyes flashed. "Escalante played us. The DGI turned our own men. We never had a chance." The room fell silent, the truth ablaid. Havana's streets, alive with Fidel's voice, mocked their hubris. Maheu thought of the years. The safe houses, the pills, the lines crossed. ZRRIFLE was a fevered dream, born in Cold War panic, undone by Cuba's resolve. He stubbed out his cigarette, the ember fading like their hopes. Havana, Cuba, December 1963. Fidel Castro stood on a balcony overlooking Plaza de la Revolution, his olive fatigues a beacon to the cheering crowd. The sun blazed, Havana's air thick with salt and triumph. Kennedy's death, a shock even to Cuba, had stilled the world, but Fidel's focus was his island's survival. The DGI's reports, delivered by Fabian Escalante, were a litany of victories. Verona's plot crushed, Cubala's betrayal exposed, the CIA's poison pills now trophies in a Havana vault. Fidel's laughter rang out, a weapon as potent as his speeches. "They come for me always," he told the crowd, his voice booming. "Pills, guns, lies. But Cuba stands." The plaza erupted, fists raised, a tide of defiance. Escalante, watching from the shadows, allowed a nod. The DGI had broken the CIA's back, turning assets like Verona's contact and Cuba into pawns. Fidel's survival was a myth forged in fire, his charisma a shield against the Yankee vultures. Escalante knew they'd try again, but Havana was ready, its web unbroken. Fidel raised a cigar, its smoke curling like a vow. The CIA's failure was his victory, a story to rally the world. Havana glowed under his gaze, unbowed, eternal.